Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Ah, finally. Okay. I can hear you. You can hear me. Apologies for that. Headphones were acting up. Okay, so I don't know how much of a crowd we're going to get today, given that this is not our normal time and it was shifted. Interestingly enough, even though I shifted it, when I accepted the invite on my IBM side, it's not on my calendar, even though I accepted the shift. So I don't know. Maybe Outlook doesn't like Google Calendar. I'm not sure. Let's see. Okay. Let me copy, paste this. Where is I can never find my Windows chat participants. So this may be a short meeting. But we'll try to make the best of it. Okay, if you can sign in, that'd be fantastic. Just put the link there. For today, I was kind of wanting to just continue on the conversation from last time, which is one, the positioning meeting time. Does this time work for you all? Like if we alternate with the supply chain integrity working groups bi-week, that they're not doing the meeting, would this work?
We may be the wrong group to ask since we're the ones that could make the time.
Yeah.
Okay.
But you all are the ones that usually show up to this meeting, so right. So I'm not looking to lose my normal participants, right? Yes, we could gain more, but I don't want to lose my core team that has been around for a while. So I'm not sure if this time actually works for folks, because it didn't seem like there was anything on the Google Calendar that I could see on my end that conflicts with this time. But yeah, I'm looking for any thoughts. It looks like Bruno, it helps with you. It works for Mike. I know.
I'm good with it.
Okay. Okay, so let's try out this time slot every other week and see what happens. Let's see how that works for us. We get it. Well, 1, 2, 3, 4. There's 5. There's a +1 on Slack, so +5 votes for this time. Okay, that works for me. I wanted to give a quick update just on the S2C2F gap analysis. I need to say analysis coverage. There you go, coverage analysis versus Salsa versus Fresca. In the June 6th meeting, I did start going through the document with the broader team, and then the next meeting's on the 20th, right, Jay? For S2C2F.
Yep, it's the 20th.
Okay, so we'll continue that review. And then I'm sure there'll be plenty of action items that come from it. So at least that work is underway, so that way we can have that broader supply chain integrity coverage, and really looking at the details of each of the specifications or requirements to say, okay, there's a gap right here, or there's an opportunity to potentially enhance this area where it transitions from one to the other. And you'll have to excuse my voice. Allergies are wreaking havoc on my throat, as you can hear. Any questions or comments about the S2C2F coverage analysis? Nope. Okay, so I did want to go through the GitHub. There it is. This GitHub repo. Oh, there's new issues. Are these old? These are old. Okay. I did go in here and do some cleanup of the supply chain integrity working group repo. There is a charter update C-Rob created this a long time ago, but I know that Isaac had been working on a SCI working group charter, and I actually added it into this open PR. There were, I think, some comments from Josh, but I didn't get any other comments. Oh, hi, Marcella. Thanks for joining. This is the PR if folks are interested. It would be good for folks to kind of chime in on this, and no worries, and see what you all think. Again, this was like a direct copy and paste of the where is it? Charter. Right. This is the draft charter that Isaac had created, right? And we had all gone through and started adding notes. I know, Marcel, I see that you have new comments. I think a lot of the old comments have been cleared out. But I remember beginning of this year, we went through this. So it would be good to get folks' feedback on the PR. Oh, go ahead, Marcella.
Oh, I just wanted to say that I think Isaac and I already resolved most of those comments.
Okay.
Maybe, yeah, I guess if there's still some outstanding ones, then.
Please, yeah, I'm not able to resolve them on my, because I don't own, oh, maybe this one I can. But I'm not going, yeah. I think those are the only two comments. One was automation with automated tooling, and then this one. But those are not too bad to cover, and we can put them in the PR. So this PR I created a while ago. So if there was any changes that you did that he already resolved and I'm not seeing, feel free to, look at the PR and try to fix it in the actual PR, because what I want to do is just add this already and as a first iteration. And if we need to reiterate on it, that's fine, but we need a charter in there. Per the, I think it's the TAC rule or something like that. Is that right, Mike or Jay, that the TAC has a rule about all the working groups have to have charters?
So the working groups, yes, the working groups all need to have charters.
Yeah.
But I think they're moving. I think they're going after SIGs too. So, I mean, working groups, SIGs. Everybody needs to have a charter. Everybody needs to have a mission, a vision, scope, and all that.
Yeah.
At the very least, there should be a scope, mission, a vision, or objective in the scope at the very least.
Yeah, and I think I saw somewhere that Isaac shared this charter with the TAC. Is that right? I thought I read it somewhere in the Slack, maybe. Let me see if I can find it. Supply chain integrity. So one quick update on my end. I did circulate the vision doc to the TAC for review as promised. So that was on June 6th. So I can add a comment here. Like, how do I add a comment? Nope. Oh, it's because I'm not logged in. I'll do that later. But there was a comment that the charter mission, Isaac. This is from the Slack. Let me put a link to the Slack message. Copy them. That Isaac communicated to the TAC. So I don't know what the outcome of that was. Was anyone present during that call? No. Okay, so let me ping Isaac in this thread. Isaac, good news to share from the TAC. Okay, so I just pinged in Slack to see, what was the TAC's thoughts on that. I expect to provide an update on this comments. So that way we can just go ahead and just commit this, because this did go into strategy and the looking back and the priorities.
I believe Isaac put it up as an issue. I know I talked about it in attack. And I think there was an issue created on it, but I'm not terribly sure about that part. And I'm not next to my computer right now to actually look at it.
Okay, okay. So what I'll do is I'll put, you mean like a TAC issue, right?
Yes.
TAC issue number, maybe J or someone to add link later. Yeah, because I'm not, I have a stand up every day at that time, so I can never join the TAC meetings. Okay. So that was one thing that it would be good to get folks' eyes on, comments in the PR. The other thing that I noticed that there was a setting.yaml file. I went through and changed some of this stuff because the group used to be called developer identity. And so I'm obviously changing it to supply chain integrity because that's the new name. I changed the chairs and the admin, right, to Chris. I'm thinking that's you, Jay. Million 2016. And then myself. For contributors, I don't know who all contributes to this group on a regular basis at a higher level, right? There's a positioning, but then there's the working group proper. And so I put you, Mike, because I know you're pretty much on all these, but I don't know the rest of these people, right?
So CNexec is he's the CTO of the CNCF. M. Peters, I'm not sure, but Joshua is Joshua who's
Yes.
from Salsa.
Yeah. So do we keep these people? Or
I don't know. I mean, I don't think they've contributed anytime recently.
Yeah.
I would just double check just to make sure, like, are any of those folks like, I don't know, CNCF employee, I mean, not CNCF, but Linux Foundation employees or something.
Okay. Okay, yeah, I put, what I did was I removed it from here, but then I left it as a comment.
Oh, okay.
Item that this was the original, so I don't.
Yeah, that makes
lose
sense.
it. Right? Because I was like, okay, well, we can always add them back, but like, I know who Luke Hines is, but I've not seen him in a meeting for SCI working group in a long time.
Yeah.
So I kind of put, this section of previous collaborators just in case. But I wasn't sure what else we wanted to have in here or what else we should be putting in here. But I just figured I'd keep it to its original purpose, which was, it seems to be to set permissions based off the username. Yeah. So, and then I think that's it. The readmes, if I remember correctly. Yeah, the readmes was just notes. Oh, I know that the TAC at some point was trying to push us away from Google Docs. And into something else. Does anybody know if that's still the case?
I'm not familiar. I know that it seems like I would say almost like every other week there's a thing of like, not everybody can use Google Docs, but all the other options are just the same. And in fact, actually, one of the things I know that has come up a few times has been that, a lot of things like whether it's HackMD or similar, it's less about the individual tool and more about companies being worried, obviously, about easy access to a tool that allows exfiltration of data. And so I'd be curious to know if any potential alternative solves that problem versus, it being an issue there.
Okay. Okay. And then the other thing, I don't know, did I create? I don't know if I created it in this structure, but I tried to create based off what we talked about, or maybe I didn't yet. We were talking about doing nested folders where maybe it's in my branch and that's why I can't see it. Give me 1 second. There it goes. That we would have a positioning SIG folder. In here, this is where, you know, the positioning SIG charter, etc., which is a little bit different from the working group. And we would just need to alter the salsa one that we had before and expand the scope. But then the blogs for positioning would be here. I remember us talking about that and recording it previously, and we were going to try to do the same thing for the SCI working group blogs. But the SCI working group blogs, there's no place currently for it. So I don't know that there was ever a decision on how to handle the blogs. And I know, Jay, you were working on a one-pager. I don't know where you are on that.
It's coming. I've been sidetracked every which way from Sunday, but it's coming.
Okay. One pager from Jay. One page, blog guidelines. From Jay. Yeah, so that way we can add it to the SCI working group. GitHub. Okay. Anything else that folks want to discuss? I know that there's probably conferences coming up. There's blogs that still are in play that we need to work through. Yeah, I'll put a pause there and open up the mic for folks to chime in. Nothing. Okay. Any thoughts on next? I know some of you weren't there last week, but I had given a proposal of next phase, and it was very quiet group trying to figure out the next steps, right, for SCI positioning. We already started these two, but what about conferences and maybe tutorials for newcomers? I was explaining how not everybody is a reader, right? I don't like reading long articles. So what if we did something, a combination of like a video, like an actual small YouTube video or audio clips on the different not subcommittee, different SIGs, right? Salsa, Fresca, S2C2F, to broaden the audience that we can reach, right? Because not everybody's going to have time to read the blogs. Not everyone may even know where to get the blogs. Sometimes it's hard for me to find some of the blogs, to be honest with you, right? Versus maybe a short video clip that's on YouTube that you can just say, you know, SCI Working Group 101 or something like that. Just you know, throwing stuff out there. So I don't know what the next phase of this group should be. Obviously, I have some thoughts, but it would be good to hear from the broader team on where do you think we should go next or tackle next. Crickets again? Okay, I'm not having crickets twice.
Oh, no. So I was going to comment a little bit here. So I know one of the things that I know we had discussed early on when positioning and adoption were going to be two separate things. Was, hey, it probably some of the adoption stuff made more sense to fit into positioning at least early on before we were ready with 1.0. I do wonder if and this is, you know, I'm talking purely about salsa right now, but I do think it's kind of tied to some of the other stuff like S2C2F, Fresca, or whatever else. You know, I know that just yesterday, a bunch of us, us co-creators of Guac submitted that we would like to contribute Guac to supply chain integrity group as and the OpenSSF. But I think one of the things that I think would be useful is to sort of discuss, like, I doubt that there is a large enough scope on adoption yet to say, hey, let's split off adoption into its own thing. But I do think that maybe we want to talk a little bit about, hey, S2C2F, right, is 1.0 already. Salsa is 1.0. What can we do to start like driving that adoption now that 1.0 is like, both of those things are 1.0. I think we still want to drive obviously community engagement while going through that. That's still kind of like, the day-to-day, but I do think that especially looking at, so far, at least on the Salsa side, very few folks are adopting Salsa 1.0 yet. There's no real tools on that front yet. There's actually, I'm not really familiar with anybody who's building tools on that front outside of a couple of the sort of examples we've given. And so when it comes to some of these things that we're looking, it would be really nice to sort of, I think from our end, see what we could do to help drive adoption of like S2C2F, of Salsa, and anything else that's coming out of this group.
Good point. Anyone have thoughts, comments on that? Yeah, I mean, that's fair, right? I do remember that adoption versus positioning, and it's similar enough, but once you get larger, then it obviously becomes an issue, but we need the membership to drive that. Now, what are you envisioning in terms of adoption? Are we having help sessions? Are we doing tutorials? Like, what are you thinking in terms of that adoption enablement? Go ahead, Marcella.
So this is something I've seen in some other projects. They have what they call office hours. And I think WAC also has that, right? And so that tends to be a lot more sort of demo and how the tools are actually being used. And sometimes it's adopters and sometimes it's, I don't know, I guess maybe the maintainers themselves showing off a new feature. And I think I sort of initially thought that the sort of regular supply chain integrity group would be for that, but maybe maybe this is the better forum. I'm actually not sure.
Yeah, that's a good point. I know Isaac's wanting more demos, but yeah, I'll table that thought for a second. Mike, you had a comment?
Yeah. I was also going to suggest things like office hours. Other folks have suggested stuff like webinars, like and this is for all the things within the supply chain integrity group, whether it is Fresca, whether it's Salsa, whether it's S2C2F, and so on. I think that sort of thing is super useful. A lot of folks are asking a lot of good questions about like, hey, I want to salsify my Jenkins. So how would I go about doing that? And I think some of that sort of stuff is useful. I think the thing that we're starting to see a little bit is also there's more than enough work to go around from the spec side and some of the other things that we're working on. And so when it comes to helping drive adoption, I think a lot of folks within some of the other groups, like the folks who are working on, let's say, some of the Salsa tools and whatever, are a little stretched a little thin on that front.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's also something I think maybe this group can also help do, is help maybe drive that message back up to the TAC around like, hey, folks are asking, how are folks, some of the stuff like, how do I do certain things with Salsa? And and I know that with some of the groups, they have projects that like they are funding, let's say, hey, we hired a consulting firm to come, drive the salsifying Jenkins or whatever. So I do wonder if there's some stuff on that end, or because I'll say it's just a lot of the community members, I think, who ones I spoke to do seem a little burnt out from the huge drive towards 1.0, and then like, great, 1.0 is out, I have other things I need to address.
Yeah, correct. Okay, so that's a good point. on the TAC and the funding. So we could definitely look at that option. I'm trying to think about, like, when I know the tools for 1.0 are small, right? So let's just take Salsa 1.0 as an example. How would we drive adoption if the tools aren't there? Right? How do we even do a demo if the tools aren't there? Because I think maybe that's the crux of it, right? If they don't know where to go get the tools, or there is no tools, then how can one implement it? And that would take time to demo on its own. So I'm just trying to, in my head, figure that out.
Yeah, and I mean, I think this is also, depending on who you speak to, right? Like, there's obviously concerns that there's a lot of like vendors who are not involved in the community who are claiming, hey, I have Salsa, and then you start to read through their marketectures, and it's like, I don't think they understand Salsa. I think some of the conformance stuff might help out there, but I do think, for example, I think for the past 3 weeks now, we've essentially had almost no agenda for the Salsa tooling meeting. We need to have, engineers who are interested or focused on that sort of thing. And like, that's very much like a, and I get it, right? Like, engineers tend to not like meetings. I don't like meetings.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think there's a lot of interesting, like, actual, if we can maybe also from a positioning standpoint, drive the message home that that sort of meeting is not intended to be a, let's just, and I don't mean this to be, I think what we're doing here is really great, but for engineers, they're like, yeah, when do I start writing the code? Right. So
Yes,
I think those meetings like that are intended to be that sort of thing of, hey, let me talk to other people who are developing tools to figure out, like, where can we sync up? Like, oh, hey, I'm going to be open sourcing this thing, but my company's not super interested in open sourcing these other pieces of it. So at least folks like know like what is to be expected. Or, for example, I mean, actually as a good example here, one of the things that is a little frustrating is a lot of the Salsa tools that come out of Salsa framework are right now being developed by Google, but the Google teams are not really communicating with the Salsa tooling folks. So a lot of times we learn about a new tool that's being developed way after, when a lot of folks were like talking about maybe building a tool like that in the broader community. So I think there's a lot of areas, folks can help out there, and I think we need like one or two, folks who are those project manager types who can like keep folks on topic. But beyond that, I think, we need actually some engineers to show some of this stuff off, to show some of those representative examples. And this also kind of ties into some of the work that's going to start being done on the Sterling toolchain side, right? Where the Sterling tool, or whatever is formerly known as Sterling toolchain. And that thing I think is also interesting just because, Salsa and S2C2F fit in there as those open standards that the tool should be abiding by. And I think that there is a lot of work from an actual engineering standpoint. And I think one of the problems, at least within the OpenSSF, has been there's not many quote unquote full-fledged tools within OpenSSF. Most of OpenSSF is around, like, even scorecard is a tool, but it's in service of a lot of other things, in service of a standard, the scorecard, what they're checking up on. And so I think that there's some challenges there around actually getting engineers to work on stuff within the OpenSSF compared to, let's say, the CNCF, where you have a lot of, in those cases, I just want to say more generally, what we've noticed is CNCF, most projects are backed by a company of some sort, right? So even though it's open source, like, you have OPA, which is backed by Styra, and you have, and other companies as well, but like, they're the ones who really were helping drive some of this. Even stuff like in Toto and Tough, you have, NYU driving driving that, and you have, Kiverno, which is I'm blanking on the name of the folks who've been working on that. But anyway, there's a lot of these companies that are backing those sorts of projects. And even though they're open source and they're open to the community, you still have this sort of corporate backing behind it. Whereas I don't think we're seeing that with a lot of the sort of S2C2F or salsa tools yet, right? Like, at least in the open source space, I should say. We see a couple of things from Google for the salsa stuff, but it's all like examples. They're not really, or not just examples, but they're like very keyed towards like the GitHub stuff, because just like it's the simplest case. And as folks are coming in, they're like, hey, is there any tools that are coming out of this that like are not
Regular
just
Joe Smo can use.
and something that like somebody I know, like, because I know a lot of folks are going to come in and say, like if I go and look at like just an example, some random CNCF project, right? I know I could go and look at like Crossplane, right? I know was it up something is anyway. There's like a lot of those tools in the CNCF that, hey, I know there's like an enterprise that's backing this or whatever. There's a company that's backing this, so if I need to buy an enterprise version of that thing, whatever, they can do that. Anyway, my point just being that I think that there's a little worry where there's a lot of things within the salsa space that's just sort of like, yeah, I wrote a thing, I threw it out there, but there's not really a ton of support behind it because nobody's necessarily selling a salsa builder yet. And this is sort of outside of a few folks like Active State and those people.
So do you think, because I know when Salsa 1.0 got released, right, there was a lot of corporate backing for Salsa. And obviously there's a lot of people from those corporations on those meetings. So do you think that's not enough?
So I think that,
Go ahead.
I think the thing is, if you look at it, right, you have Tecton, I think is probably one of the larger sort of things that has adopted Salsa.
Yes.
And I think the thing that folks are looking for is like more of that, right? Is, hey, are there, for example, there's that tool Macaron that came out of Oracle, but
Yes.
if you read through the Oracle stuff, it's like they've made it very clear that it is like purely like a research thing. It's not like a thing that they're really backing holistically, at least as far as I can tell. And who knows, maybe they're going to try and back it a bit more. But I think folks are starting to look for, because like when in a lot of times in the Salsa tooling meetings and some of these other meetings, folks are always asking, where's my plugin for Jenkins? Where's my plugin for this thing? And once again, I'm not saying that's our responsibility, right? I think folks who want to work on the Jenkins stuff should come in and work on Jenkins. But I think when we start to look at some of that ecosystem of tools, especially when I think about stuff that's more around the interface side as opposed to the actual implementation side, I think a lot of folks are asking more around like, hey, even if you had a handful of tools that showed me this picture of, as an example, this kind of goes into that Sterling toolchain bit, was if I had a tool or a set of tools that interop, right, where I write some code, the code gets signed by SigStore, let's say, and I push it to, a hardened code repo, and while doing this, I'm also following I'm following all the practices, and I can keep track that I'm following the practices in S2C2F, and then it's generating me salsa, builds with SBOMs and yada yada. I think folks are like asking like, hey, how do I actually go and do that, right? Like right now, the main thing is people are asking like, hey, I'm not using GitHub. What else is there for salsa? And I don't know what the answer is. Some companies are doing some corporate backing, but it's like, it's not really at the forefront, I guess, is the thing. Like, it's not like a lot of folks are shouting from the hills, yeah, we're salsa conformant. Because like I believe Red Hat is doing some stuff on that, but the idea is like, hey, they have their trusted open source or something like that, and I believe they're generating salsa attestations out of that. But I think folks are asking for a larger suite of tools in the open source space, at least, that can show what salsa does for them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, sorry for the rant.
Yeah. No worries. Yeah. While you were talking, it reminded me of I call it a macaroon, but I don't think that's how you say it. Because the picture does have a picture of macaroons. we actually did try it. And when I saw it, I was like, hey, can someone try this? And it took 64 minutes against 22 packages to get this result. Right? And I'm like, that's not scalable.
Yeah,
For 20, I mean, there are SBOMs or repos that have thousands of packages. You can't, 64 minutes for 22 packages, that's just not going to work. So, but I thought that was a good one, right? Because that did just come out and got announced in the Salsa blog, I think it was, or Salsa Slack channel. So I thought it would be good to put it here as, hey, here's this new tool. Has anyone tried it? And maybe it's not a good demo necessarily to say, hey, here's a tool that you can use, but it's a, hey, we are looking at the different tools that are being released and how they could be used and if they're good or not. Right. I don't know if that's worthwhile to share with the community, but we could do something on Macaron. Right. To say,
well,
hey, yeah, we tried this, but
yeah, I mean, I think on that front, it's worthwhile just to kind of separate like who is, let's say, an OpenSSF actual OpenSSF project versus just an open source project versus also a vendor project, just because getting into that thing leads to a whole lot of politicking as well.
Got it. Got it.
Because once again, I think we should just, you know, if these are issues they're running into, I think it's worthwhile to give that feedback and say, hey, have you considered why it takes so long or whatever, and then maybe we can handle
Yeah.
that. Oh, sorry.
Marcella?
Oh, I wanted to add that, I mean, I think Oracle actually, is it Oracle, Red Hat? I'm having a bit of a hard time keeping track of some of these newer tools that are coming out that are actually focused more on validation and policy around Salsa, but there's also Seedwing from Red Hat, I believe. And Red Hat, I think earlier this week, even demoed some other separate tool. But I think, yeah, to Mike's point, it's not, I don't know that it should be the OpenSSF's responsibility to, I don't know what the right word is, like promote or demo or teach all of these tools when the issue still seems to be that people aren't fully grasping Salsa yet. I don't know.
So yeah, I
don't know
could
if that
talk a
makes
little bit.
sense.
Yeah, I could talk also a little bit on the Seedwing end. So Seedwing is coming out of like a open source research arm from Red Hat. They're working with us on Guac. And one of the things that they're doing is they're essentially using Guac as the sort of baseline for a lot of policy. And so the idea would be, you know, Seedwing calls into Guac, for example, pulls out metadata about Salsa and all that sort of stuff, and is able to, yeah, I believe that actually is Seed, like that's their kind of like demo there. But the idea is they can generate policies, and the policies go in and call out to stuff like Guac, and Guac can which stores a bunch of data about Salsa and can, you know, cascade up so that you can, you know, do a bunch of stuff on that end. So I do think that there is, I think the big things, right, are, and this is the thing that we're seeing also, just to be clear, even though we have a problem here, it's the same problem that the SBOM folks have. It's the same problem that a lot of other folks have, is like, to this day, a lot of folks are still like, wait, why should I have an SBOM? Like, why do I need an SBOM? What should I be doing with this thing? I think folks want to better understand, like, what should I be doing with this Salsa thing, right? Oh, you're using it to kind of introspect and help say, like, yes, I took this build from this party and I think it's good. That's kind of at the high level. And then you can kind of dive in and say, you know, assuming that I believe what they're giving me is trustworthy and that they're actually following Salsa, I can dive in and figure out that, yes, they ran these commands in these ways. And I think that seems pretty reasonable to me. And I'm okay with using that in my supply chain. And then also all that metadata can be used if there is an issue in the future to go back and say, hey, what happened? You know, oh, it turns out like this line, which seemed innocuous, is actually bad. Cool, we knew to fix that. So there's that, and then I think that helps drive back this sort of thing of what are folks actually, looking for, right? Like what are folks, what do folks need, right? From the build perspective and the producing perspective. I think that also, but they're kind of tied. It's a chicken and egg thing, right? Like it's hard to tell what folks want to consume without having built it. It's hard to know how folks are going to consume it without building something first. Anyway, sorry, Marcella.
Oh, no worries. Yeah, I'm just sort of trying to add some thoughts. Because what you're describing sort of made me think of, well, would it be sort of worthwhile? And this is something that I've sort of realized in conversations I've had internally and externally, that a lot of sort of adopters are just like, well, I want to be able to prevent solar winds. And so is it partially also a matter of going back and saying, hey, solar winds did this, here's how Salsa would have helped or could help you detect a solar winds type attack. I'm not sure how we build that. I don't, but I do wonder if something tangible like that would sort of help a lot of people understand the utility and value of Salsa. And again, the question now is who builds that? How is it designed? How do we like disseminate that information? But yeah, just having something concrete to anchor the use of Salsa that isn't compliance.
So on that front, that's something we've like both in the CNCF and then as well as my work doing stuff with Kasari has been doing a lot on. And I think I don't want to go too deep into solution space right now or get into the weeds, but I remember a few folks were talking to us about like, hey, the key things for Salsa for them are, one is I know that an approved builder built this, right? So even if they're not following any rules or whatever, or I just trust them, right? It's like, okay, who do I trust to have built this thing, right? Where did this actually come from? Is super useful because that already eliminates a whole class of like impersonation attacks, right? Where, hey, assuming they haven't stolen keys or credentials or and those sorts of things, assuming that you've done that, we are able to, assuming we're able to do that, then we can go back to something like, so sorry, that's the first piece of Salsa, just knowing who built it. But then you can kind of build on top of that to say, hey, assuming they've done like I actually trust them to having done the right things, then I know this is most likely a trustworthy build and probably not compromised by all these sorts of attacks. So the thing, right, with Salsa is not necessarily, I mean, there's certain elements that would have prevented certain pieces of solar winds, right? Especially well, actually, sorry, it's not Salsa per se, but using, for example, the GitHub method, you're not keeping, you're renewing the keys. So unless they were able to steal some mechanism that gave them persistent access, they're able to, you're getting new keys. I think that to your point there, I think that's super important, and maybe something from the positioning group should really drive is that, because lots of folks are still asking like, where's the threat model? We do have some elements of a threat model on the site, but I think folks are really looking for something quite a bit more in depth so that they really understand like, oh, this requirement really does all these things. And also here's maybe an example of how it does that, right? Like an actual sort of description of, well, if you have those attack trees, right? Like, well, this sort of prevents the attack over here, this sort of prevents the attack over here. And so they never end up getting access to what, yeah, anyway.
Yeah, no, I totally take your point. And I guess I remember asking a really long time ago, how do some of these requirements map to helping you detect, right? Because like you said, Salsa doesn't prevent a SolarWinds type attack, or maybe just that one particular step, right, where they like infiltrated the compilation phase. That a salsa provenance document would make that detectable, right? But I don't know, something you said also got me thinking about the fact that, well, if people trust who generated, or the entity or organization that generated the salsa provenance, are they still going to go in and inspect it? Or do they often just say, oh, hey, it's a trusted signer, I'm good? And I imagine it's a bit of a sort of use case or case by case decision, but I'm a little bit concerned if people are still just stuck on this institutional trust aspect when salsa is doing so much more, or can be used for so much more, right?
Yeah, and I think on that end, that's maybe also another. Actually, that's probably a good blog topic. But like, because like the way I've seen it discussed was like, it's that quote unquote, trust but verify kind of thing of like,
Yeah.
not necessarily. It's you first want to validate the identity, but then you also want to essentially check like, hey, is it still doing the right stuff in there? And I think folks will start off at the trust piece, but then over time get better. And even if the verification happens out of band, or the verification happens only at audit time, or the verification happens like when something's gone wrong, it's at least better than nothing. Because right now, like the thing that when we talk to a lot of folks in the community, the big thing that they ask is like you ask them like, well, where did this artifact get built? Oh, it got built on our Jenkins. Well, how do you know? Like, how do you know that this wasn't just a developer who went, I don't want to push it through the CI pipeline. I have access to prod. I just pushed it out. And they're like, oh, we don't keep track of any of that. We don't keep track of what hashes ended up get deployed where. And you're like, well, so that's kind of like, it's like you start there and you start saying like, yes, this was built by our build system. And then you can start to go through the things of like, oh, and now it was built through our build system, and what the build system tracked, we have the list of like general commands that it ran, and we did a basic lint to make sure that it wasn't curling from, some random website or something like that. I think that sort of thing is also super, super valuable there. I think the big thing that I do think that, a lot of folks, at least initially, are just going to say, yep, it's signed by the right party, I'm okay with it.
Yeah. So since Melba is asking about next steps, or next phase,
yes.
maybe that's something maybe that's a good starting point, is to talk about how it's not enough to simply trust who even metadata came from, if that makes sense, and sort of, tell the story that Mike was just describing around.
Let me highlight this because I can barely see it. I'm sure it's the same for you all.
Yeah, because even in the case of SolarWinds, this is something I say to people a lot. SolarWinds was a trusted organization.
Yep.
And and the attackers took advantage of just this institutional trust. Yeah. Go ahead.
Jeffrey?
I was just going to add to the idea of trying to expand the aperture of folks that are aware or know about this. It seems like it would be good to try and, in addition to, potential blog activity on the OpenSSF website, what else could the best practices working group or another arm's length working group around education do to help? Because I think that this group and the other SIGs that are doing good work around various elements of what's happening with the OpenSSF shouldn't be left to their own devices to try and help, better propagate the important work that's being done.
Did I capture that right, Jeff? Right. Try to leverage those groups to advocate and evangelize for salsa.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think also it goes also the other way too. I think it would be really worthwhile to maybe have some of those groups provide feedback to salsa about like, hey, what are you seeing as the issues when, let's say, they talk about salsa, about why folks are finding it difficult, let's say, or something like that. That might also be useful too.
Agreed.
What else? There was a lot talked. And
So-
I don't think we have everything nailed down per se.
Yeah. So one thing I think would be a good next step that a lot of folks have been asking for is like a little bit more of, and this sounds like more of a webinar or a recorded video, like an hour long, like deep dive into salsa. So that folks can just sort of like go and look at the one video and watch it, because I know not everybody's going to read through the whole spec and know exactly what everything means. A lot of folks are just like, hey, before I even use the spec, or even after I've read the spec, like, okay, now how do I actually implement this? It might be worthwhile to take some example, right? Because like I got a lot of good feedback showing a lot of the GitHub stuff to folks inside of at Open Source Summit. I got a lot of great feedback on that. They were like, oh, I had a bunch of misconceptions about how salsa was set up. When you showed it, just sort of do this, this, and this. I'm like, oh, I had assumed it was like more of a this sort of thing. And I think maybe having a couple of those sorts of things that we could just sort of show people, both from the perspective of like an intro to salsa, like, with stuff like, this is something that I think might cost a little bit of money, but like with animations, right? Like showing folks like, hey, an attack happens here. This is how, something like salsa helps. And not just salsa, right? This is the sort of thing I think we should also look through the rest of the stuff in the SCI group, like, hey, here's how S2C2F complements it and protects against these things and yada, yada. But like talking purely about the salsa thing for a second, like I think the salsa bit is super important because then you get to just sort of point to that, like we can point to, hey, here's the high level sort of executive summary, why folks are interested, like what's the problem? The problem is, hey, you have SolarWinds, you have all these, you have stuff like typo squatting, you have all these sorts of attacks. Salsa protects against them because by doing these things, then here is a representative implementation. And I know this is something from the tooling group that we want to work on, is something actually that one of the biggest pieces of good feedback we had gotten, or one of the biggest pieces of feedback I had gotten regarding some stuff we had done with Fresca, was they really appreciated, we had some example, like, in one of my example repos, I had like, this is what happens when you have a compromised compiler. This is what the attack looks like. And this is how something like Fresca would protect against it. And so if we have, I think, a few more of those of like, here is literally some bad code. And if we ran it through if we ran it through a salsa build, it should get caught or something like that, right? Like here's something and here's how salsa would catch that thing.
Okay, yeah, so I agree, right, with the whole webinar video. I think that's what I was trying to get to the last meeting, right? Where not everybody's going to read that blog, right? We could do a long one, we can do short clips. Sometimes people only have like, 5-10 minutes to listen to something. So I'm all for, some webinar video of some sort, to not only for salsa, but for S2C2F as well, right? Because I do think that will drive a broader audience and more adoption. Jeff, you have your hand up. Or is that old?
Sorry, thanks for that.
Yeah. Marcella?
Oh, on the video, I think even just having a, I don't know, 2-3 minute quick clip or something to talk about this institutional trust versus, I don't know, sort of attribute-based trust or whatever you want to call it, would probably be better than a blog, like you said. So just wanted to mention that.
Okay. And Jay?
Yeah, this goes along the lines of I guess what Mike and Marcella are saying. What about training modules? I know that Adrian and I, as part of SC2F, we were talking with LF and we were talking with SKF about producing training modules that can be given during and we missed the Open Summit to do this, but maybe if we could get them developed and this is for salsa and S2C2F and maybe even Fresca, and if we bring guacamole, all that kind of stuff, but get training modules set up, and then as part of like and I don't know if you do it with proposals or if during the CFP process, or maybe get it through the planning committee, but actually have a room set up that does nothing but provide training
Yes,
on how to use, these frameworks.
agreed.
I mean, I thought that idea was phenomenal. We actually started the process. It's a slow process, of course, because you got to write these damn things. But I think that would be very beneficial, and speaks to what Marcella and Michael were talking about.
We have 2 minutes left, folks. Any other last minute thoughts, comments on this? And also, should we be using GitHub to start to tackle these? Because usually I highlight the action items here, right? But sometimes we forget, sometimes they get lost. I have to go find the highlights. So how do we want to track these? Do we just keep them on here? Do we want to open up GitHub issues in the integrity working group? Marcella?
I think GitHub issues are a good way for me to track things recently, but I'm one opinion. Yeah, my question in the last minute, and maybe this is something to talk about the next time, is the question of what the time frame is, or the sort of when we plan to have some of these next steps done, or how we're going to be tracking progress.
Yeah.
I don't have an answer, but maybe
Yeah.
that's also something we can discuss on GitHub. I don't know.
Yeah. Okay, that sounds good. So I can take a crack at opening up some of these, and maybe the time frames conversation will come through. I don't know what NTD means, Bruno.
Need to drop.
Need to drop. I got it.
Okay.
Okay, thanks, Bruno. Okay, so yeah, so we can potentially talk about timeframes in the open, and then when we regroup again, we can maybe finalize it if it's not already finalized in the GitHub issue. So, okay. Well, we are at time, folks. Appreciate all the lively conversation. And again, I think you know where to find me. It's called Slack. But thanks for joining on a very different day, but the same time. And I will see you soon. Thanks, folks. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.